I say it all comes back to curiosity and respect, right? Because curiosity without respect is intrusive, and respect without curiosity is uneducated.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and guests. The content here should not be taken as medical advice and is for informational purposes only. This podcast also does not establish a standard of care, doctor-patient, or client relationship. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. And because each person is so unique, all listeners are encouraged to connect with counseling and medical professionals for assistance with their personal journey. All people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved.
Welcome to We're Not Fine. I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
And I'm Doug Jensen. We thank you for listening every week to our deep and thought-provoking conversations about relationships.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, friends. We've missed you.
We have missed, well, I feel like, I don't know that I missed anybody, Talia.
What about him?
Oh, me? I kind of did miss you. Hey.
You guys, welcome back. Welcome back to We're Not
And we
Fine.
talk every day, so I don't miss you because I
No.
talk to you at least 3, 4, 5 times a day now.
Yeah, and I think my threshold was maybe like a 48-hour period that we didn't talk. And I was like, oh my God, what did he even have for breakfast?
Did your
What
skin
is
start?
happening?
Yeah. I mean, I think we were starting to crumble.
Did my skin start crumbling
I was
off?
just going to say, did it start peeling off or something? Because of the lack of anyway, I don't even know what caused that. So,
and even last night, we were just sending each other videos from our peaceful little summertime patio oases.
I got to tell you. So I have, our AV guy is actually also my contractor. Thank you, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. I'm going to use your name. I hope that's okay. I'll make sure that's okay.
He actually saved us this morning.
Yeah, he did. He actually helped us figure out our episode recording. However, here's the deal. So he created, and I did not have any idea how much I would love this, but this above ground deck. So it's probably like 10 inches above the ground. And I bought this amazing furniture. And then last night, my buddy Josh and I'll make sure I can use your name too. We moved this fire pit that said it was 1,000 pounds. And I think it was because it only took 2 of us. I'm kidding. It wasn't 1,000 pounds. We couldn't lift that. But we moved it over there and we were sitting there. The propane fire was on. We had made skewers for dinner on the grill. And we were just sitting there, and I looked up at the sky, and I saw the stars, and there's a pine tree that's really old and like maybe hundreds of years old, actually, truthfully. And so, well, maybe 150 maybe. Anyway.
Not 160 or 167.
I think 153.6.
And it was so magical and beautiful, and your little cafe lights.
Gin and tonics, cafe lights. It was phenomenal. And I found myself aware of something because we were sitting there and actually my buddy was like, this kind of feels like vacation. And I'm like, it does. I don't even feel like I'm in my yard anymore.
Oh, God, that's the best.
And it was something. So I just sat there and we just sat there having this conversation for probably, 2-3 hours. And I found myself thinking everyone should create that space in their lives somehow. Even if you don't have if you live in an apartment, whatever your living situation is, you can always find a way, I think, to create that space that makes you feel like you can be contemplative and calm.
That's right.
Like calm is the word that was really there. And I literally sat there staring at the propane, which fire's a little mesmerizing to me.
Oh my gosh, it is.
I don't start fire, but
it also, I feel like, pulls people in. If you have like a fire in the fireplace or even a fire pit, everyone is just drawn to it.
Yep.
And yeah, a little peaceful oasis is the best, where even just like a little candle or like different shades on your window.
That's right.
And not only the space, but sometimes it's just an experience, right?
Yep.
And I know that maybe my way of creating that experience yesterday was not the healthiest, but my margarita.
Your cucumber jalapeno margarita.
So I will
from your
say
garden?
This thumb right here is brown. It's a brown thumb. Everything that I plant dies. And so you have no idea the pride I feel when I go to my little dry, crusty garden and I found one beautiful cucumber and one jalapeno.
That's enough for a margarita.
And I was like, oh my God.
Margarita.
And then I also pulled some mint
Ooh.
I know.
Ooh, cucumber, mint, jalapeno.
It was but also it was just the process of creating that. It felt like this self-care and this joy and music in the background, and we infused the tequila with it, and then we made margaritas.
Yeah, I know. It sounds
really
lovely.
fun.
It was so much fun. And of course, Talia and I were like sending pictures back and forth. I sent a video of my buddy and I making skewers. And then later when we had that fire pit is just kind of crazy for me. Like it's so good. So I love it as the addition, and it's going to be great.
And remember how Rob in our video was like, "Hey guys, nice kebabs."
Yeah. And I didn't know exactly what he was referring to. So I've taken that a lot of different dimensions, and I'm just going to run with it and not ask Rob what he really meant. But that is so critically important to create that space in your life and just really be able to calm yourself and relax a little bit. Which, speaking of, that's not necessarily what this episode is going to be about today. We have a fairly complex episode, as with any episode that talks about abuse and trauma, in this case, not only family of origin, but also other people and the church in particular for our next guest. But,
Yes, we had the most amazing, mind-blowing, and I don't say that lightly, like we are still recovering from how big, beautiful, powerful that episode was. So Shana Francesca was talking to us about her experience growing up in an alt-right evangelical Christian cult, and her incredible story from oppression and abuse into this beautiful narrative she's going to share with us now. We can't wait for you to hear, and we hope you get as much value out of it as we do. And without further ado,
listen in.
We are so excited to introduce to you Shana Francesca. She is a speaker, a writer, and an entrepreneur, and her work centers around intentional leadership and life design. She believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention, design our lives, and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our story, which I love so much because we so believe in the narrative and how to change our own narrative. And you're here today to talk to us about your incredible story of abuse in your family of origin, as well as in your community that you said was an alt-right evangelical Christian cult, and how you broke free somehow, and through creativity you found your authenticity, and now you are a business owner and a public speaker and such an inspiration. And we are so grateful to have you to share your story.
Thank you. I'm so thankful to be here.
Shana, I'm delighted as well to have you here. And, as I'm listening to Talia doing the introduction, I obviously have a very kind of serious expression on my face because every one of us sitting in this room right now kind of knows the intensity and the depth and the complexity of what your experiences. And, as a therapist, as a more psychodynamically based therapist, I value so much that family of origin, those childhood experiences as it relates to learning and managing, whatever experiences we have, traumatic, oppressive, abusive. I know it's a humongous question, but I'm kind of curious. Tell us about your childhood. Tell us your story.
Yeah, that is a big question. So before we dive in, though, I want to make sure that we just issue a little trigger warning for anyone who's listening. If you are still working through your own trauma, if you grew up in an abusive household, if you grew up in a high control religious environment, if you have experienced physical violence through sexual assault, any of those things, we're about to discuss many of those things. So you might want to scooch past this, first few minutes of the conversation if those things might be triggering for you and you might feel unsafe in that discussion.
I appreciate your sensitivity.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I was born into an abusive household that then my parents became a part of the Evangelical Christian church and attended ever more conservative, ever more controlling churches. And I think that was a function of my father looking for justification for his behavior and a support and a cheering section, right, for his behavior. because I truly believe that there's no such thing as good or bad people. I think there are people in this world who refuse to recognize that the very same action can be beneficial to one group of people while harmful to another.
It's good insight.
And that lack of accountability in our lives. And for me, what accountability looks like is a wide variety of people who can give us perspective and uphold and help support our own accountability practice, right? Because our accountability practice is what allows us to show respect for others. And without that accountability, we run roughshod all over other people's lives. We are the monster in other people's lives, whether we want to be or not. And unfortunately, that is the place that my parents came from, is a place of violence and abuse had been normalized in the way that they were raised. And when I say that, I don't mean that either one of them grew up in a very abusive household, but their discipline, right? Quote unquote discipline was screaming, was dismissal of their feelings, was spankings, was violence, right? And so their dysregulation, their parents never taught them how to regulate themselves. Their dysregulation was rewarded with punishment. And so that became normalized in their own lives, and they became parents very young and had no tools to be good parents. And so through that journey, when you recognize, when you're a child and you recognize that your parents are consistently dysregulated and you are unsafe when they are, you also begin to recognize that the people they surround themselves with are equally unsettled, unsafe humans. And so it's no shock that they ended up in an alt-right Christian cult. And I use the word cult very specifically because there's a lot of people who would say, well, that's just a church. Well, for me, what crosses that line, right, in that discussion is human trafficking. And what I mean by human trafficking, when you look up the definition of human trafficking, it is coercive control of someone's behavior, use of their labor and their body without their consent. And a child cannot consent to their labor being used.
That's right.
So my free labor was consistently used by the church for the purposes of the church's furtherance and the purposes of their financial holding in the community. There is consistent hiding of pedophiles, lack of, they are mandatory reporters. They refused to report. As a matter of fact, anybody who went to the police to get help, to get away from their abusive partner, was chastised and threatened to be ousted from the community, right? So there was consistent, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you're in an environment where there was someone who was stalking me within the church, and I went to the pastoral staff and said, this person is stalking me. This person is in their 40s. I'm a teenager. I need help. I can't go to the bathroom without this person waiting for me, without this person following me. This person, even when I've said no to them consistently, has shown up and brings me roses to church every Sunday. And this person is in their 40s. I'm a teenager. This is pedophilia. Yeah. Let's call a spade a spade. I got no support from my parents or from the church, right?
Can you say more about that very issue when you say you got no support? So you let them know what was going on?
Yeah. So what the support that could have been so simple would have been somebody walking with me to the bathroom, me feeling safe to ask for that support. They're like, you'll be fine, but I'm not fine. I'm not okay, and I don't feel safe, and I'm bringing that to your attention, and that's okay. That you are saying, no, you're going to be fine. In what way, right? In what way? Because I'm continually feeling less and less safe, and those things, that just goes to show people the religious environment I was in, and then you had the environment at home. My first instance I was raped was 3.5. It was by my babysitter's son, whose father was an alcoholic and was violent. So that little boy used my body to regulate his emotions. My second instance, my father started grooming me from the time that I was 12, probably before then, but I really can look back and recognize it the most when I was about 12. My father forced me to take a chastity pledge in front of our 2,500 person church, even though I begged not to, because technically within the church, and I do not believe in virginity anymore. It's not a real thing. It's a construct, and it's a lie used to control people's bodies. And purity culture has a direct through line to pedophilia. So I do not buy into any of that anymore, but I'm, just explaining, what my experience was, is that at the time I very much believed in virginity, and I knew that I wasn't a virgin, right? Because I'd been raped at 3.5. And so for me to stand on a stage and say and declare that my body was pure felt really contradictory, and it felt very traumatizing. And I begged to be able to just do it in private. And I was refused. And so then 3 years later, my father sexually assaulted me. And now I look back and I see that the chastity pledge wasn't about me at all. It was about my father declaring that he owned my body in front of all of those people.
Wow.
And honestly, that these are just bullet points. These are not my everyday lived experience, where I wasn't allowed a proper lock on my door. It was one that you could rotate with your fingernail if you were on the outside. I wasn't allowed to keep my bedroom door shut unless I was getting changed. And even then it was, less than 3 minutes. People would be knocking on the door or open the door if they felt like it was closed too long. It was that level of control, was that I never felt like I was able to be with my own thoughts and safe inside of my own body. And as a neurodivergent person, I was consistently overstimulated by this very dramatic and very traumatic environment that I was consistently exposed to. So yeah, that's my background in a really small nutshell. Just kind of hitting the bullet points for people to kind of gain some understanding.
Shana, I am so incredibly sorry that is what you had to endure. And what strikes me as especially amazing, I mean, I don't even know. It's like right now we're hearing the story from somebody who has done the work, clearly processed the grief, the trauma, the rage, wherever you are in that process. I'm sure it's not a direct line to healing, right? But as a child, how did you even know that this was wrong? If it's all you knew and everyone around you was buying in and drinking the Kool-Aid, it's like, did you know, like, people shouldn't have control of my body? People should tend to my fears and take care of me. Like, these are my caregivers and I don't trust anyone. And the people who my parents are with are also dysregulated. And how did you know when you were surrounded by it?
I mean, what's funny is that it's not funny, but what's interesting is that when you look back, you can see that, like, I can see that it was just me and my immediate family who were part of evangelical Christianity. No one else in our family was. My dad grew up Catholic. My mom's dad was Catholic, but not deeply, ingrained in religion. It was more of a practice for him more than it was, a religious thing. And so it was just my immediate family. However, my extended family, it was just as dysfunctional, but in different ways. So I knew that there was other ways to live, right? Which is why my dad kept sequestering us more and more away from people. And we spent less and less time with extended family and less time with people outside of that environment. Because you naturally know that education is what busts through harmful ideology, right?
100%.
And whenever people push back against that and say, well, you can't because you've got to train a child up in the way they should go, then that's indoctrination, right? So if you expose somebody to a whole world of education, then they get a chance to make a choice for themselves about what actually is in alignment with who they are, right? Just like I heard this metaphor and it's so perfect. Teaching somebody about a frog does not make them an amphibian, right? So teaching somebody about the world is
really
not,
because, of course,
right,
as a gay man, somehow talking about gay issues makes people gay, right?
Correct. Yes, exactly.
And let me just point out, Shana, as you know, I learned about straight people all during my growing up experience, and somehow I'm not straight, so it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
Thank you for your comment.
but here's the thing. They know it doesn't work that way.
I know.
They know it doesn't work that way. The lack of education, I said this to someone the other day, The fact that we're denying children education consistently has nothing to do with their actual fear that it will cause anything. Maybe the average everyday person might fear that, but the people in control absolutely know that's not what's happening. I always heard growing up that, if we don't know history, we are doomed to repeat it. Here's what I actually think. If we don't know history, then there's somebody who's actually actively trying to repeat it. Right? If they're denying us access to that history, they are trying to repeat it, actively, purposefully, harmfully trying to repeat it.
We have several instances of that with our current laws. Yep.
Yes, exactly. And so I think my father knew from the beginning that it was going to be hard to hold on to me because of who I am. And so he fought and pushed back so hard to try to break me. And I think that's really what it is. When you deny people access to education, you might break them psychologically. You're breaking them down, right? Because you're not giving them access to understand themselves. And so I think that's more what it's about. I don't think people actually believe you're going to indoctrinate somebody into being gay, because it doesn't make any damn sense. None whatsoever.
Those kids are going to become drag queens who get read to storybooks.
Right. Right, by amazing humans who, by the way, statistically never harm children. Meanwhile, when you look at the statistics,
that's right.
It is actually the pastors and the politicians and the police officers and the people who say they're here to protect children who are actually actively harming children. And I hate to say that, but it is the truth.
It
is the truth. We know that from all of the publicity from the Boston Globe on about the Catholic Church, etc. And it is amazing to me that if any other organization were to have that pervasive of child abuse,
it would be shut down.
It would be shut down. It would be addressed directly. There would be consequences. We wouldn't continue to support those priests who have abused kids.
There's actually even more abuse in the evangelical Christian, groups when you look at the numbers.
Wow.
And so it's very, very scary. I even when I was inside the evangelical Christian church, I used to say as a teenager, "Oh, I would never date a Christian man." And people were like, "What?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I will never date a Christian man."
And why specifically? What did that mean to you in that moment?
I did not have the language. I'm neurodivergent. So my brain was recognizing a pattern I didn't have the language for yet, right? Is that I saw the exploitation happening and normalized within the evangelical Christian church. And I was like, I don't want any part of that. As a matter of fact, the first guy I ever dated was an atheist.
It's so interesting. I mean, okay,
not surprising.
I'm so curious also about.
I'm an atheist now, so maybe that's what just came.
That's like a chapter.
You got around an atheist, and then you became one. That's
yeah, well, I mean, it kind of happened 25 years later. So
I wonder if this like a neurodivergence that you're talking about, which I'm really curious. I kind of want to ask you what that is about.
Is it? Yeah.
I'm
going to ask you. Yep.
I can absolutely see there is something about the way that you are seeing from like this bird's eye view. That's why I was asking, like, how did you know? You were like immersed in it. It was everywhere, but it's almost like you found a way to rise above it. And not only did you
I was curious. I say to people all the time, the foundation of who I am is curious. And I never let, no matter how often I was punished, they couldn't beat the curiosity out of me. And even though I was unsafe when I asked questions, I asked them anyway, even if I asked them into the void, even if I just screamed them into the void. What happens when you allow yourself to ask those questions and to get curious is that you find the answers. And so I found my way to books. And at first I was only allowed to read Christian literature. But as a teenager, once I got a job and my grandfather gave me a car, and that car was in my name and I was paying for it, right? I was paying for the gas. My mom had it under her insurance, but I was paying her for the insurance. So it was something that my father could not actually legally have control over. And I did know that because he has 3 attorneys on his side of the family and 1 on my mom's, right? So I was around the law and discussions of law. So I knew that because it was my possession, he didn't actually have any legal right to take it from me. And because I had a job and I was paying for the gas, I was able then to go to Barnes and Noble, and I started reading poetry, and I started reading all these things and connecting to creativity. And that's why art is one of the first things that they shut down. Is because when we connect to our creativity is an outgrowth of our curiosity, right? Our creativity is the manifestation of our curiosity. Our creativity is the manifestation of our innermost being, right? It is rebellion at its core, right? And I use that word not in the way that Christianity uses it, right? Because I don't actually believe there's any such thing as rebellion, because no one has authority over me that I don't give them. I don't actually have to do anything. Ever.
And yet, as a child, of course, you are vulnerable. You are prone to, those influences that you have. Shana, I have a two-part question for you. One is, I would like you to describe for our viewers and our audience kind of what your neurodivergency is, because it's a word that we've used periodically. Talia will identify with that.
I mean, I've got ADHD, so do my boys. I am endlessly fascinated, not just by how it makes our lives harder in certain ways, but it's just a superpower if you look at it in other ways. And there's something really incredible about the way you not only saw yourself in the situation, but it's almost like you kept rising up to look at higher, more meta levels of oppression or the systems and patriarchy, whereas you were just this little kid stifled in your room that didn't have any privacy.
So I would love for you to describe that neurodivergency, but then secondly, one of the things that we're talking about, Talia just referenced it, but you referenced it, Shana. If I could do my graduate program again, I've been in practice almost 30 years. I want to know why some of us escape those harmful messages and we don't succumb to that. And, you've referenced curiosity, you've referenced being able to get to a Barnes & Noble and educate yourself. But, Shana, don't you sometimes wonder how it is that some of us decide not to actively engage in racism or homophobia or sexism or xenophobia? Like, some of us make that differentiation, and you somehow at some point thought something's wrong about this. And I am going to use my information. Go ahead. I'm curious.
First, I want to say this, then I'll define neurodivergence. I want to be clear with everyone that my pathway to leaving evangelical Christianity was not a linear one, and it took a very long time. I left the church that I grew up in at 26 by myself. Everyone else in my family stayed. I went to a non-denominational church thinking it was the Assemblies of God. And that evangelical Christian, I'm going to use real names.
I know I remember record burning at my Assembly of God church in my hometown. Wow. Anyway,
I thought it was the Assemblies of God. I thought it was the way that they handled things, the lack of accountability, the misogyny. And so I went to a non-denominational church, but it was evangelical Christianity in sheep's clothing.
Wow.
And I saw the same patterns rising up. And after 4 years, I left and I went to another evangelical Christian church. And then after about 3 to 4 years, saw the exact same pattern popping up. And I was like, whoa, the problem isn't, it's evangelical Christianity. And so I didn't really leave the church until I was 34, right? Only 4 years ago. Right. But I was on this long-term deconstruction journey. So please understand that long-term trauma and complex PTSD are not something that just overnight in a couple of years you can solve, or it's not a problem to solve. It's a thing to understand what it does to your body, what it does to your brain, how it rewires your entire nervous system, your brain, your body, your heart rhythm. It changes everything, right? And so please understand that this is a long-term journey and you need support in going through it. Second, neurodivergence is autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. That is what falls under the umbrella of neurodivergence. Do not ask me what dyspraxia is because I can never remember.
How did you know that was literally, I was like, I've never heard of that.
I knew it because every time I say it, someone's like, what's dyspraxia? And I'm like, I don't know.
You're like, I'm an expert in many things, but not dyspraxia.
But not that. So I only actually recently learned that I might be kind of dyslexic, but I did, there was this test you could take online, and it was like, if you can read this properly, you're probably dyslexic. And I was like,
Uh-oh.
Wait, I just read it properly. Oh, shit.
My little one has dyslexia and ADHD,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we just recently, you can look up dyslexia
Yeah.
simulators. Have you
Yeah.
seen those?
No, I haven't.
Oh, we were almost in tears. I mean, the poor boy is 13 and we're trying to find this, there's an amazing school locally that they specialize in ADHD and dyslexia, but we just looked at this dyslexia simulator and it was like the letters were moving and changing and going back and forth and skipping around. And I was like, are you serious? Like, is
Yeah.
this
I
what's
don't think I have it very seriously, but I think it's something that coincides and is like a comorbidity with ADHD. So I was diagnosed with ADHD at 5. Thank God my mom had me diagnosed before they really were ingrained in this evangelical Christian cult. So they joined evangelical Christianity when I was 4, and I started going to the school that was associated with the cult at 5. But they didn't join the church till I was about 10. And so there was a gap there in how severe things were in my life. And so it was more a matter of like my mom just trying to get whatever help she could for me. So she was successful and able to get me on medication. But the school refused to allow the state funded help that would have been provided for me to help assist me in my learning. They refused it. And for the longest time, I didn't know that. I thought my parents didn't allow it. But my mom was like, no, we begged. She was like, not we. She's like, me. I begged for them to, and they would not allow it. Because then the state had some kind of purview at the school, apparently.
Wow, that is so creepy.
Some paranoia.
I hate that.
Yeah. Well, not paranoia if you're doing the things that you're doing.
Wait,
Yeah, right.
that's such a good
Not
point.
paranoia.
Crazy.
More like self-preservation. And so anytime somebody's refusing accountability like that, it's definitely a red flag. And when they're refusing to allow someone support, and they labeled me as, as handicapped, and I was kind of shunned in ways and bullied significantly. And it was extra hard because I graduated with like 21 people, right? I went to school with the same 21 people almost the same from the time I was 5 until I was 17 when I graduated high school. So you really have to assimilate. And so I am extremely high masking. So in the last couple of years, I started taking some online tests. And by the way, I want to tell you, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but the statistics around self-diagnosis for neurodivergent people is really high, is very solid. It's somewhere above 90% accuracy. Mm-hmm. So when I TikTok kept taking me to like neurodivergent TikTok, and I was like, I know I'm neurodivergent. And then there was a couple women that I followed that were like, yeah, I recently discovered that I'm autistic, and they had gone through and done the diagnostics and gotten officially diagnosed. And they were like, yeah, I didn't realize this is actually an autistic thing, not an ADHD thing. And I was like, wait, it is? Wait, I do that.
Wait, what was it specifically? Not the math.
So it was that they have to emotionally prepare themselves to be in social situations and get physically drained, sometimes for days at a time, from being in social situations. And that was just like one thing. And I was like, well, that whatever. And then it was like thing after thing. And I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to take this online diagnostic. And so I took the diagnostic, and it was like, it is likely that you are autistic. And then it's like, but we think you should take this test too. And it was about a masking test. And I am very, very, very high masking. Mm-hmm. To the point that the test was like, you're in detrimental territory. Your mental health significantly suffers because you are you are so high masking, and you need to be careful about that.
And would you tell people that might not know what masking is? Like if you're not in the neurodivergent world, you might not even ever think about what masking is.
Yeah.
But what is it?
For me, masking is consistently entering into spaces where other people are and having to survey the room watch everyone's body language, listen to what they're talking about, and basically invent a version of myself that is safe in that environment. Now, it is similar to code switching,
I was just going
but
to
it
say,
is
it's
not
like
the
code switching.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's similar to code switching. They're cousins, I think. They're like
I think they're
kissing
cousins.
cousins,
Yep.
but they're not the same thing. For neurodivergent people, masking is a like constant 24-hour a day thing, no matter who we're around. Code switching is typically done in specific situations when you're with a group of people you know yourself not to be safe with. As a neurodivergent person, I'm acutely aware that if I am not very careful with my speech patterns, with my body language, if I'm not carefully monitoring everything that I'm doing, I will be socially ousted.
Right.
And so it's a way of life rather than a moment, than like something that is demanded in a moment.
Yeah.
And I think about the difference between, I mean, there are levels of, it sounds like because you come from a place where being safe, not being safe, being bullied, being accepted was, you know, what you were needing to choose between. It feels very much like the masking keeps me safe. Right. Whereas, like, I think about maybe people who don't even have a trauma history that might not even know they're doing it. It's like the code switching, right? I'm just thinking about like when I'm with a bunch of like real Minnesotans, my Minnesotan comes right out. It oozes out of, you know, the way that I speak or, you know, a million different
Yeah,
ways.
and for code switching, especially for Black and brown people,
Yep.
is necessary for safety. It's also necessary for gay people at times to code switch to appear to be more heteronormative in
Right.
order
What do you
to
mean?
survive. You know exactly what I mean.
Thank you for matching me, Shana.
Right.
I mean, what I think is so interesting is like the difference between the keeping you safe and further connecting. So it's like a large spectrum that isn't just, you know, and if you are in a minority, the code switching and the masking
Is self-preservation.
is self-preservation.
Self-preservation,
Right.
and is just as damaging. It's just as psychologically damaging. I want to be clear about that. I'm not in any way stack ranking these things. I want to be clear that both can be psychologically damaging and are when done for self-preservation. The thing is that I learned when I unmasked, I was punished, right?
Yes.
Right. And so masking became an absolute necessity for survival. And that is why I'm so high masking and why at this point, you know, I've had this discussion with other neurodivergent people. I'm not even sure that most of the time I know the difference between my masked and unmasked self.
Yeah, that's normal. It's natural.
I think that's normal and natural. And, you know, I appreciate something you said, Shana, about the realities of the complications and the implications on mental health and self-esteem and identity and self-concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an interesting correlation there. And it's fascinating because one of the things you said beautifully at the very beginning of this episode is that everybody experiences this differently. You know, it's kind of like religion. Religion for some people can provide structure and routine and a belief system and faith and whatever there might be. So I don't want to, you know, it's not all bad or all good. But I think, Shana, your comment about like how that specifically manifests for you, but there is no way around that. Like the whole idea, we did an episode recently and we talked about my trip to South Carolina where there was some code switching going on to accommodate me as a white Northerner. And it horrified me, right? It makes me very sad because I feel that thing that you just said. I feel that it's going to be something that's detrimental to that person. Like, how do they feel about themselves having to do that? How do I feel? And I like to think that I don't code switch as a gay guy, but my older daughter in LA will make lots of jokes like, boy, when you run by, you know, some guy who's clearly straight, you're like, hey, man. And I'm like, I do not say that. And she's like, yes, you do. Hey, bro. Right. And I'm like, well, there's part of me that is that too. But you're absolutely right. Like,
and I want to kind of help shed some light on why I found it to be so detrimental. And some studies that I've come across is that what ends up happening is that when you are praised for being disingenuous, right? When you are praised for being something that isn't actually you, that you a mask that you're putting on, a face, a code switch, when you are praised or lauded or appreciated or promoted or any of these things, in society for having to be disingenuous to survive, it does something psychologically to you, right? And so, I that's why I said I want to make sure that we're not stack ranking these things, that it is, and especially for neurodivergent Black people, I can't imagine the level masking on top of code switching and the psychological damage, or like a Black neurodivergent queer person, like that level of masking and code switching is, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. And so, I think it's good that I think that none of that would be necessary if we created a society where we were more kind, compassionate, and functioned as community. But we have created a society where homogeneity is what is praised, right? That everyone behaving just about the same, right? We haven't been taught how to be human and how to allow other people to be human. We've been taught how to survive in capitalism.
Do you know what's so interesting about that, though, Shana, is my sense of you, and I will also speak for myself, like I value the opposite of that. I value the differences amongst us. I want to learn more about, I know you do. Like I'm listening to you and I'm like, when we say this kind of generalized the reality is there are those of us, and I always tell people who feel really, really, really frustrated with the political system right now, the anti-gay, the anti-female, the
anti-human. It's just anti-human.
Thank you so much. That's better put. The anti-human laws that are coming into effect and the Supreme Court decisions recently. I'm hopeful. There are lots of us out there. Yeah, thank you for that. I don't think there's a lot of people who...
The thing Alice Walker said, and I'm paraphrasing. Alice Walker said, the quickest way to disempower us is to convince us that we have no power. We have immense amounts of power.
We fucking do. That's right.
We have immense amounts of power. And I believe that more of us believe the same and believe in people's humanity and believe in functioning as community than we are allowed to believe. Remember what I said. We aren't taught to be human. We're taught to survive in capitalism. And capitalism thrives off of the industrialization of human beings. And the industrialization of human beings can only happen if we are hyper-individualized, right? Black and white dichotomies happen in hyper-individualization. Right? Nuance and community happens in connection with one another, happens in the gray. And I think way more of us actually function in the gray than we're allowed to recognize or see through media, right? But I think the more of us that have these conversations and have them in public, we are starting to bust through. It's like the Matrix, right?
Yeah.
Which whenever the podcast bros talk about the Matrix, I'm like, you sound ridiculous because that movie was written and directed by 2 trans women. You do know that.
Wow, I did not know that.
Trans women, made that movie about the recognition of being trans. It's about waking up to being trans.
Did you know?
I did not know that. I'm sure my Hollywood daughter knew that.
I need to do a little more research. Shana, I hear that what you're saying, though, is that growing up the way you grew up with and somehow finding this perspective inside of you, this bird's eye view that is so meta and so big and so powerful, like you've got your finger on the pulse of what is happening in the world. How did you start to feel that authenticity brewing, or even that desperate desire to know who you are as the antidote to the patriarchy or the control or the oppression, the creativity, the authenticity? Like, how did you break free?
Yeah. Dancing and writing. I would like the simple answers. I found creative outlets that connected with my body. And really now I look back and I recognize they were somatic, right? So dancing is a somatic therapy, right? And so I started dancing when I was 18 months old, and it was something that's always been a part of my life. And so, I would dance in my room and, turn up the music and dance in my room. Now I also look back and realize that's stimming.
Yep, sure.
That's not wrong.
That's also stimming. Yeah, I was definitely
stimulating for our audience.
Leaning in to that.
Yeah. Stimming for autistic people is just a repetitive behavior or emotion that moves stagnated energy in your body.
Right.
And because the world is so overwhelming. And so, I was doing these things and I kept a journal. I still have all of my old journals. So I want to write several books. The first one is going to be kind of like this conversation is, how did I get from where I grew up and seeing excessively intentionally harmful leadership to being someone who speaks about coaches around and workshops around intentional and ethical leadership, right? Telling that story. And then at some point, I want to be able to tell the story of, part of also the conversation we're having is, how did I get from there to here? And how do we recognize that it's not the Hollywood polished story of rags to riches? It's a long story. And we have to honor that long story and the failure along the way, because failure is just recognition that we've gotten to the edge of our understanding and learning in this world, and or the edge of what we thought ourselves possible, right? We've gotten to that place where we've failed. We're afraid. We're not sure we can move forward. But when we get curious, we can move past that fear and that failure, and we expand into a world we didn't even know we were capable of entering into. And we're capable of so much more than we've been taught to be allowed to even imagine for ourselves. And so, I have all of my old journals, and I will not go through them without therapy.
That could be very traumatic.
Very re-traumatizing. It will be re-traumatizing. I'm very certain of that. But I think it's important to pull out some of the aspects of those stories and some of the things that I read, and to see the journey that I took in real time. And to honor that story because I have that record. But really, it was the finding ways to express myself in ways that other people had no access to. So my imagination, my writings, my dancing and my movement, I found ways to find my creativity and to find my voice and to keep it alive somehow. And so, if you're listening to this and you're not sure, know that your voice is powerful. That's why they're trying to take it. That's what they're trying to take. They're not trying to do anything else but to take your voice. And if they can take it, they've won, right? But it doesn't mean you can't take it back. Doesn't mean you can't find it again, because it's always in there, right? Your lived experience is your lived experience. And it lives inside of your body and it lives inside of your brain. And that wisdom of that lived experience lives there too, whether you've been allowed to listen to it, recognize it, or honor it or not, but it's still there. And you can practice honoring it. You can practice giving it a moment. You can practice letting go of busy so that it comes forward, because the other way that you steal people's power is by keeping them busy. Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And Shana, it's so interesting. I have like 50 things from this conversation thus far that I'd love to zero in on. And I keep, we're going to run out of time if I do that. What's interesting? I find myself wanting to talk a little bit about generational trauma, but that goes back to the original childhood story.
Yeah.
And you referenced it really beautifully. What I really want to focus on, We're Not Fine is a podcast about relationships, and everything, as you well know, that you're describing, whether it's the neurodivergency, whether it's the abuse that you suffered, not only from other people, but within your own family of origin. The reality is, of course, that affects your ability to trust and connect and attach and create security and find comfort and probably make good choices about who it is that you pick in your life. I see your smile. And so I'm somewhat curious about relationships for you. And I must tell you, and I'm hoping our audience is also interested in this, like, what are your relationships with your family of origin right now?
Yeah.
As well as others.
Okay, that's several questions. Okay.
I know that.
Let's start with what's my relation. The easiest one to answer, the quickest one to answer is, what's my relationship with my family of origin? So you remember the first question, because I'm going to forget it and I'm going to need you to say it back to me.
Trust and love. We've got this.
Okay. So my relationship with my family of origin is rocky and complicated. I am no contact with my father, for obvious reasons. I genuinely say to people, if at any point he had gone to therapy, taken ownership, genuinely dove into and understood the impact of his actions, where it came from, why, if he sat down to really truly understand patriarchy and the religious trauma and all of the things that I don't know that I would have to still be no contact, right? Because I do believe there is redemption for every person, right?
That's lovely.
But there has to be ownership and accountability and responsibility taken, right? Does that mean I would be close with him? Definitely not, right? Because that just doesn't feel good for me. But would there be a pathway to him to being in some aspect in the periphery of my life? Probably, right? but I just never saw that. And so there's absolutely no contact. Not that I owed anyone an explanation. I want to make sure they tell, I fully have forgiven my father. I just can't allow him near me because he is still extremely harmful. I have gone low contact with my mom many times, as recently as like a year ago. And I finally, was like, hey, you're going to have to take responsibility. You're going to have to take ownership. You're going to have to learn that I don't actually want an apology, because the way you apologize is centering yourself in my pain. You're actually putting ownership on me to forgive you, rather than you taking ownership of the harm you caused. And your apology is not my responsibility. And your work is not my responsibility either, right?
Do you mean, when you say centering herself in your pain, do you mean that she's making excuses or wanting you to?
He's wanting me to soothe her.
Okay. Yeah. Take care of her.
He's wanting me to soothe her.
pain.
Yeah. So I wanted to like clarify that, because if you've ever gotten the icks when someone apologized for you, that's probably why.
No, that's so real.
Yeah. And so, there's been a lot that's had to go on. A lot of conversations that have had to happen. And so I still have contact with my mom. We have a great relationship now. We're building on it. We're growing it. It's still a fragile thing.
Yeah.
I am pretty close to my one sister. My other sister, not so much.
Because?
Both are complicated. So,
and you don't have to answer if you're uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, my sister who's close, I'm the oldest of four. So my sister who's closest to me, we went, it's hard, because even if you live in the same house and have the same two parents and grow up at the same time, you do not have the same experience.
That's right.
100%.
Not even close to the same. And so we did all of those things, grew up in the same house, same time. Our experience was different. The things we experienced were different. And at some point, there was a lot of resentment on her part toward me. I think she misdirected it. And in her mind, we had to have a conversation, because she kept saying, well, you knew better. And I'm like, babe, I was a year older than you. So you were putting a lot of ownership on me, like I was an adult in the situation, but I was not. I was a year older than you.
Does that make you, Shana, doubt yourself in any way? Does it make you question your reality when somebody suggests that you should have or could have or would have done something different?
It did for a really long time.
Of course.
It did, because I was like, well, could I have? And I was like, no, I was parentified already. I was parentified by my parents. And that's what she was responding to, was the fact that I was parentified and I was the only safe-ish person. Right. Because when you grow up in an abusive household, you are also not well. You are not treating people well. So there was a lot of lashing out on my own part. And so there was a lot that had to be healed, and we are fine. We're just not superbly close. And I think it just has to be that way. My sister, who's 10 years younger than me, we are a little bit closer. She's on her own healing journey, similar to my own. She's kind of like 10 years behind me in her healing journey. So there's that like dedication on both of our part to move forward in our healing in similar ways. And
but
so
she has a mentor and support that you never had. So
she also is married and has a kid. So like there's also a different dynamic there as well. And as far as my brother, I love my brother very much. But he is 25 and his brain isn't fully formed, and he still isn't questioning the nature of his reality. He's still very much wrapped up in the patriarchy, and oftentimes he says things that I find very scary. And I get uncomfortable around the things that he says, and I get uncomfortable around him. I think he's doing his best as best as he can to kind of move through it. But he's still young, right? When I was his age, I hadn't even left evangelical Christianity. And so I keep that in mind.
I also wonder if the patriarchy is serving you, it sure is a lot.
There's less incentive.
Yeah.
Correct. There's less incentive to move out of it and to do something about it because it is serving you. Correct. Yeah, he's a white man in America. So like, yeah,
Shana,
the patriarchy serves him.
And do you try to alter his reality? Do you try to keep him grounded in
when he asks me questions, I answer them?
That's great.
Okay, so you wait for a question?
I don't think it's beneficial. Here's the thing that evangelical Christianity teaches you. You've got to preach at people. You've got to tell them how, you've got to tell them, but what I've learned is that in fact, it's much more beneficial to ask people questions and to answer their questions and engage in a curiosity practice with them than it is to speak at someone or to try to change their mind.
And that's what a therapist does.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It took me a long time to figure that out because it was so indoctrinated into me that you have to indoctrinate other people, right? And that you owe them your story and you owe them your full truth and you owe them it was like, the layers of trauma you have to work through when you grow up in that kind of environment is insane. And every time you think you're okay, you're like, oh, wait. There's more.
I can't even imagine. And so, the question that Doug asked, which I really love, is about how did all of this affect your ability to trust and love on the other side?
Yeah. So I am at this moment someone who has chosen to be single, unmarried, and childless. Mm-hmm. I say that because I am not sure. Most men have not confronted their part to play in the patriarchy. They have not confronted the fact that they do not trust and believe women. They do not listen to women. They dismiss our lived experience. They dismiss our no. Unbeknownst to them, they're walking red flags. And until they've done the work to not use my body to regulate themselves, to not use my emotional labor. If especially a cis-het white man, right? A cisgender simply meaning aligned with your genitalia, basically. The genitalia you're born with, that gender was assigned to you and you align with that gender and that sex. So a cisgendered heterosexual man, a white man, if he does not recognize that there's actually coercion involved in every sexual relationship that he has because there's a power imbalance, right? So coercion works in a situation where there is an uncontrolled power imbalance, right? And so if a white man can't say, oh yeah, I know that I'm in a position of power over you and I know I could use that power to harm you. If he cannot acknowledge that, then I'm not dating him in any way, shape, or form. Right. Yep. It's so much emotional labor for me to kind of work through whether or not somebody is safe for me to be around and to give and share energy with, that I have just chosen to pull back from dating almost entirely. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's just almost entirely. And also I'm still in a place where I'm still working through, showing up as enabling, weaponized incompetence.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, when I meet a man who doesn't allow me to do everything for him, then I'll know I'm safe. Right.
Yeah.
But I have yet to meet that man. Right. So for me, it's a matter of, in the past, I've dated really unhealthy people and it became a point where I was like, I'm giving so much energy to other people that I just want for myself. And so I'm just going to keep it for myself and I'm going to funnel into my business. I'm going to funnel into my joy. I'm going to funnel into my relationships with incredible people around me that are romantic, but not sexual, right? Like I've recognized that there's so much romance in my friendships with my girlfriends, right? We bring over a bottle of wine to the house and we sit around and snuggle on the couch and watch a movie, or we'll go and have a dinner at 8 o'clock at night over candlelight in a dimly lit restaurant and share food together. And there's so much romance in that, but there's nothing sexual about it. Not that there's anything wrong if there was, but I get fulfilled in romanticizing other aspects of my life so that I recognize I don't need that from a heteronormative relationship, right?
Oh, Shana, my head is just like spinning with additional questions. I literally probably lost, as anybody might be looking at the YouTube video, I think my head was just going back and my eyes it was kind of exploding. We could go like 5 more hours on everything you just said. I really want to highlight something, Shana, that is just in the back of my mind from the very beginning of this conversation. You mentioned how, and please correct me if I misunderstood this, but how even rape for you at 3.5 was someone else's emotional dysregulation. And I loved how you said that. It actually just hit me so hard, and I circled it really big and wrote it down. And you continuously kind of respond now to, in a heterosexual relationship with a cisgendered white male, you are experiencing that same thing. Like there is manipulation in some ways for some of these people who are not aware of themselves or what their motivations and drives are. I will also.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who the man is, by the way. It doesn't matter the color of their skin, by the way.
I also want to add, just as a 6 foot tall guy with some size to me and a tattoo, I walk around and looking the way I do and shaving my head. I walk around this world with a little bit of power as well, even though I'm gay. And that translates into all that we talked about before as well. So I could go on and on and on and on and on about that. But in the essence of like trying to get through this episode, and we might need you back. I want to know, we want to know, Shana, is there any advice? Is there any feedback? Is there any recommendations you have for people? And you've kind of referenced a little bit of this periodically in this episode, but what would you recommend for people who find themselves in this same situation, whether it's church or whether it's religious abuse or whether it's family abuse? I could go on and on, because you also talked about like how we recreate relationships to maybe heal some of our trauma. Our neurology gets stuck. So there's a lot of conversations, but what recommendations?
So many. I just recommend, I know that what I've seen over and over again in my work is that the foundation of living an intentional and joyful life, right? The purpose of living an intentional life is joy. The more intentional we get, the less we are connected to busy, the more we look to form community around ourselves to support the fact that we can't actually succeed on our own. That's the lie we've been taught. We're meant to live in community together. And the more that we can then lean into and have time to get connected to our own curiosity. And I tell people there's really simple ways that you can connect to curiosity. Go for a walk. Yeah. Go for a walk and Google the thing you've seen 1,000 times and you think is mundane. You've never really thought any more about it, right? It could be an oak tree. It could be a caterpillar. It could be a blade of grass. It could be like, oh, what kind of grass is actually indigenous here? And what kind of grass do we generally grow on our lawns that's not actually indigenous? And it's kind of really harming harming the world. Yeah. There's lots of ways we can get curious. It's about finding the interesting thing about what previously seemed mundane. Because I go back to the fact that we weren't taught to be human. We were taught to survive in capitalism. And our humanity is a recognition that we are part of a deep and powerful ecosystem, and that every action we have has there's an equal and opposite reaction in the world. And when we take responsibility for that impact by understanding our impact and understanding how we actually can and should coexist with the other living beings on this planet that are not human, and we don't stack rank ourselves above all those other living organisms, that's when we start to really be connected and truly understand the definition and the meaning of community, and when we truly get connected to joy. It stops being such a lonely place, and it starts being a really beautiful and powerful place. And you start to value this life in a way that perhaps you've never had the space to do so before. And so I say it all comes back to curiosity and respect, right? Because curiosity without respect is intrusive, and respect without curiosity is uneducated, right? And so we've got to move through the world with those two things.
And it's interesting, Shana, that you referenced the word space, because to be able to do that sort of internal self-reflection, introspection, gain self-awareness. People ask me what therapy is about oftentimes, and as many people who have watched the episode know, I believe it's about living an honest life, whatever that is for us. And that doesn't mean living in fear. It doesn't mean wanting to oppress other people, because in any situation where you want power over somebody else, that's not honest. That's based on all kinds of insecurity, fear, ignorance, etc. So the reality of this is that when you talk about finding this joy and being curious, I wish for everybody to take a moment and know that you do have the space. You can make that space in your life to have that curiosity about
yourself. But you need community around you, right? And that's the thing, right? Like you can, if you have kids, don't have kids, whatever it is, like you can move in community together and share responsibility in everything from home repair, shoveling, pull maintenance. I mean, you can share resources in a variety of ways that help to free up time and mental energy, right? So that you can have the space. But it's a matter of reconnecting to the people in the world around us and being vulnerable enough to ask for help and knowing and finding the people that you're safe enough to be vulnerable with in that way.
I mean, it's incredible. And I feel like, Doug can attest. I don't think I've ever been this quiet in my entire life for an entire hour. I've been like on a different plane of existence because I think there's something about just the way that you see the world. It's just, I feel like I need 3 hours of silence to like process and journal what just happened. But I think that what you're saying also is that all of this comes from taking ownership back of your own voice and your own soul and the curiosity to then engage with the world around you and the community around you from this newfound intentional, joyful design. Like you have cultivated not just this tiny little isolated world where you can exist without being in relation to anyone else because of your trauma, but these beautiful relationships that you've described with community and with your girlfriends. And of course, the healthier you are, the healthier people that you attract. And I don't know, I think Doug is right. I think we need another, 80 hours.
Yeah.
But
80 sounds about right.
80 sounds about right. And I cannot tell you how grateful we are that you came on and you shared your story with us. I feel like I can just picture thousands of people's brains just exploded and now they're going to have to think about everything. Shana, will you tell us where people can find you? Plug everything that you're doing that you want people to find. I'm sure everybody's on their phones ready to look you up.
Yeah. So you can find me, as far as social media, you can find me on LinkedIn and on TikTok the most. You'll find me on all the social media, even on Threads. But the places I spend the most time are LinkedIn and TikTok, and it's at Shana Francesca on both. But my website is another great place, and there's a good amount of resources. We're actually getting ready to update it in the next couple of months. Summer is just a time when I try to relax, so adjusting all the copy is something we'll save for the fall. But there's upcoming digital workshops, and I do them as lunch and learn, so they're 45 minutes. So we're getting a lot of information in there. There's a 35-page workbook with each of them. So one is intentional leadership, and the other is mastering intention, designing your life. I think both are applicable to every person on the planet. But if you're looking for more personal inner work, go for mastering intention, designing your life. And if you're a leader and you're looking to connect with that, I would go for intentional leadership first. Both kind of touch on each other. So that's coming up. My website is www.consonate.world. The .world is important. Because .com will take you, I don't know where.
And we'll have everything in the show notes.
In the show notes.
We'll make sure we have, all the links.
Yeah. Consonate is CONCINNATE.world. And I actually have the definition of the word there on the website. So it'll kind of guide you through how the name came to be, why, and the way that I run my business, our own vision statement and so on and so forth is on there.
Shana, thank you so much for your wisdom and insight and really just ridiculously courageous story. It's really tough to get out of circumstances. And I know one of the things that I love that you said, this is a lifelong journey.
That's
right. Like it just does not stop. There is not a finite resolution to trauma or abuse or anything that we experience in this life. So thank you so much for your time. It is a pleasure knowing you.
Yes, thank you, Shana.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
As always, we thank you so much for tuning in. We're so grateful for all of our listeners and all of your support. And if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast, We're Not Fine, wherever you listen. And for 500 extra bonus points, rate and review and share it with your friends, or 5, or share your review with us. Send us a DM. Tag us. We will scream and sing your praises to the world.
You know, one of the things, even this episode, which was fairly intense and had a lot of pieces to it, and we could have gone on for another 10 hours probably. Absolutely any questions, comments, anything you need further explanation of, anything you want us to discuss further, either with this guest or others, go to we'renotfine.com, submit all of your questions on that website. There's an easy click button to be able to do that to us.
And find us on our socials. Douglas L. Jensen
That's
with
me.
an E-N, and I'm Dr. Talia Jackson.
That's her.
And We're Not Fine Pod. Oh, your finger is like right up my nose right now. YouTube, where We're Not Fine, and TikTok, We're Not Fine Pod. Boop. And we really are not fine, but...
At least this episode was not as long as Oppenheimer.
But cha-cha-cha.